Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is calling for the easing of sanctions in order to enable medical systems to fight COVID-19 and limit global contagion. The High Commissioner said that broad sectoral sanctions should urgently be reevaluated in countries facing the coronavirus pandemic in light of their potentially debilitating impact on the health sector and human rights. Bachelet cited the sanctioned countries of Iran, Cuba, DPRK, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. She also emphasized that the impact of sectoral sanctions on access to essential medicines and medical equipment, including respirators and protective equipment for healthcare workers, has had effects on Iran. Venezuela has received the first delivery of humanitarian technical aid from Russia in the form of 10,000 coronavirus diagnostic kits. Foreign Minister Jorge Raza was accompanied by Russian Ambassador Sergei Melik Bagdasarov at the Maiquetía International Airport, where the shipment was met.
We are receiving, as I've said, the first shipment of many to come in the future. In this case, we have supplies to carry out 10,000 tests in order to diagnose if the person has or doesn't have COVID-19. And here the greatness is demonstrated, because a power is not just a power simply for its military capacity, for its economic capacity, but also it's a great power because it's great in what is moral. And that's what Russia is showing right now, as the People's Republic of China has also shown. Those are the actors of the new multipolar humanity, which is arising, and we will go forward helping one another for the benefit of our people.
We are here, as you have said, to receive the first shipment of diagnostic kits to be able to attend to the needs of 10,000 people. This is just the first step in our cooperation in this area. It is very close technical cooperation within our strategic relation, and we will continue forward in the fight against this sickness.
The governments of Venezuela and Mexico worked together on Monday to repatriate citizens from the two countries on the Venezuelan airline Conviasa. The plane and passengers underwent all security and cleaning measures to guarantee a safe flight home. 73 Mexican passengers were returned to Toluca, prompted by wishes to return as the region battles the coronavirus. More than 100 Venezuelans who requested a return flight were repatriated on the same aircraft.
This exchange that we are doing with the help of Conviasa Airline allows so that Mexicans who found themselves in Venezuela and Venezuelans who have been grounded in Mexico can return. Thank you truly, and for us this is a gesture that we are thankful for, and we thank the Mexican people and government.
During the second week of the quarantine, the government of Venezuela strengthened measures to prevent the increase of infections. Venezuelan and Cuban doctors are visiting neighborhoods to detect new cases, isolate suspected infections, and stop this disease from spreading.
Cuban and Venezuelan doctors leave the health centers known as the CDI of the Barrio Adentro mission in search of possible cases of coronavirus, visiting people from home to home in order to avoid what has happened in other countries.
We are visiting patients that don't want to go to health centers because they are afraid or for other reasons. This way, we can prevent the transmission of this disease.
Cutting the transmission and preventing the collapse of the healthcare system is a great challenge. The inspections are among the measures announced by President Nicolas Maduro to prevent the coronavirus in the second week of quarantine. The doctors don't stop. They work all day in order to locate possible cases. Everyone they run into on the streets is questioned. The coronavirus must be stopped at all costs, and the people need to be informed. The doctors follow a route which was laid out by a massive survey which was conducted through the Carnet de la Patria system, in which the majority of Venezuelans are registered. Over 12 million Venezuelans have filled out an online survey through which they could diagnose themselves. This made it easier to identify a first group of around 21,000 suspected cases to be inspected. 2 women, one from Panama and another from the US, were already isolated. Their tests and treatments are totally free.
It takes around 24 to 48 hours to process the sample. Meanwhile, you will remain isolated and follow preventive measures to protect other people around you. Wear a mask and wash your hands frequently. We will treat you depending on the symptoms, meaning that if you have a fever, we will give you something for that.
And then they came to look for me.
In the meantime,
Hospitals. The brigade includes both doctors and nurses that arrived in Italy on the weekend to help contain the spread of the coronavirus and treat patients. Present at today's inauguration were local authorities and regional officials of Lombardy, the hardest hit part of the country. Cuba is also sending a medical brigade to help fight against COVID in Dominica. Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarry took to Facebook to express his gratitude. The brigade consists of 25 nurses, 5 doctors, and 4 lab technicians and will arrive on Thursday. Minister Bruno Rodriguez is among the participants of the video conference. He said that the rapid spread of the disease requires uniting wills to develop joint actions of cooperation, and that the moment calls for setting aside political differences to focus on facing the emergency. Moving on, over the past days, people across Brazil have been expressing their dissatisfaction with the far-right government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic by banging pots and pans from their windows. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Muir, has more on this.
For the last 7 nights in a row, every night during the national news broadcast on global television, thousands and thousands of people in cities across Brazil come out onto their balconies and bang pots and pans, mainly in the middle-class neighborhoods. Now, this is a traditional middle-class form of protest in Brazil. During the parliamentary coup against President Dilma Rousseff in 2016, there were similar protests in middle-class neighborhoods calling for the ouster of Dilma Rousseff. So what this means is that the traditionally conservative Brazilian middle class has turned on President Jair Bolsonaro. And the reason for that is his horrible mishandling of the coronavirus crisis. Instead of making any decisive decisions or showing any kind of leadership, he initially denied that it was a problem. He's passed it on to a bunch of people in his entourage. One of his own drivers was hospitalized with respiratory conditions today because of coronavirus. And he's deliberately fighting against governors who are trying to take the steps needed to guarantee that the curve at least gets somewhat flattened out. For example, when governors in Rio and Sao Paulo announced they were closing the airports, Bolsonaro tried to reopen them. So this is why there's a growing consensus around the world, even in conservative sectors, even in the business community, even organizations like the Eurasia Group, that the Bolsonaro administration is providing the world's worst response to the coronavirus crisis, and there's a major human rights tragedy coming down the path here.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. Let's take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Chinese authorities have announced they will end a 2-month lockdown in most areas of Hubei province, including the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the global pandemic.
From midnight on April 8, Wuhan will lift the control measures for passages from the city of Wuhan and Hubei province and orderly restore external traffic. The personnel departing Wuhan will move safely and orderly with the Hubei Health Green Code. From midnight on March 25, the control of the exit passageways from Hubei province out of Wuhan will be lifted, and external traffic will be restored in an orderly manner.
In the city of Wuhan, life is gradually going back to normal, with people allowed to walk out of their home to shop for necessities and businesses slowly coming back to life. More than 6,000 residential neighborhoods have been verified as epidemic-free, and the residents are being allowed to go out. Major automobile plants have also partially resumed operation as the epidemic is abating. The origin of the novel coronavirus has quickly turned from a strictly scientific question into renewed tensions between the United States and China.
US President Donald Trump continues to call the novel coronavirus the Chinese virus, ignoring any criticism of his racist rhetoric. Chinese officials also point out that labeling the virus as such will only increase tensions between both two countries and encourage xenophobia against Asians.
Coronavirus is a global phenomenon. They exist on a global basis. It's an unlucky accident of history or nature that they emerge in a certain place. And it's really important that we don't start to ascribe blame to geographic origin and that we look at this in terms of how we respond, how we contain and how we stop this virus.
Although the novel coronavirus was first reported in the Chinese city of Wuhan, scientists say the real question is not its geographical origin, but which animal species was the original host of the virus.
The pandemic broke out in Wuhan, China, but it doesn't mean that the disease originated from Wuhan. We have no evidence to back up this up. This is a scientific problem.
Many conspiracy theories have come to life since the start of the pandemic in January 2020, but a recent research published in a prestigious scientific journal seems to confirm that the new virus is not laboratory-made or purposely manipulated.
It is evident that President Trump, like Western media, have made an effort to present COVID-19 as a Chinese virus, even though there is still no conclusive proof of its origin. Ironically, while China has done everything to find out the origin and characteristics of the novel coronavirus, the United States refuses to collaborate with these research projects and reveal any of their own findings about the virus.
After containing the pandemic in record time, China now leads an international aid campaign, providing medical supplies, sending expert teams, and sharing its scientific knowledge about the virus to countries around the world.
China has been transparent about its research progress on the virus, while the United States hinders the possibility of international cooperation. While China and Cuba are sending aid to the countries most affected by COVID-19, the United States is leading a campaign against China with misinformation and the use of xenophobic terms. All of this while maintaining sanctions against countries like Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, contributing to a major humanitarian crisis.
As the COVID-19 pandemic paralyzes the world and the death toll closes in on 20,000, research into the original animal host of the virus continues. Identifying the original host species will not only help in the prevention of future zoonotic outbreaks, but will also help the development of an effective vaccine.
In the latest effort by the U.S. Federal Reserve to prevent a recession, authorities have implemented the unlimited purchasing of bonds to help markets. In order to ease the fears of investors, the Fed will now be able to purchase U.S. Treasuries and agency mortgage-backed securities with no limit to hopefully curb job and income losses. But experts say this measure may not be enough since Congress has continued to stall over a stimulus package for businesses. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Gestoso, has more.
Thank you. The coronavirus still a big threat in the U.S. It's growing exponentially. We're talking that it's getting closer to 50,000 cases proven and over 600 deaths at this very moment. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, where is the largest cases in the country, mentions that it duplicates the amount of cases every 3 days, and he says that most definitely there is a crisis. He said, before you could think that there was a freight train. No, this is a bullet train that is coming against us, and most definitely the country is still not equipped or unequipped to face this type of crisis. He said that they need ventilators, they still need masks, they still need gowns, and they still need a lot of hospital beds. The convention center in New York City, the Jake Jock Habits, has been transformed in an emergency hospital and is going to be including about 1,000 beds in order to treat coronavirus cases. In the meantime, President Trump is trying to at least evaluate the possibility to restart the economy as soon even as next week. He said yesterday in Twitter, we have to be careful that the cure is not worse than the situation itself. Also, this morning he tweets that the people in the country wants to go back to work, and that is a big conflicting versions of what the president believes that could be the solution of this crisis, and some of his best advisors, and even Governor Cuomo, that says that you cannot put a price in order to save lives. In the meantime, here in Washington, the Congress is still debating the stimulus plan, about $2 trillion, in order to precisely help the most vulnerable people in the country, but also the huge corporations that mostly the country is at a full stop. And the case of the minority leader of the Senate, we're talking Charles Schumer, has mentioned that he believes that sometime today they could reach an agreement and propose the signing of the bill to the president. So far, this case is still very much a country totally still. At least 1/3 of the Americans are in their homes, and the closings are getting more strict. For example, in Puerto Rico, the order is that any person coming from any part of the world, the US included, is going to be put in 14 days quarantine. The same thing said the governor of Florida. So the situation is very fluid, but the crisis is extremely, extremely grave.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced that the nation's 1.3 billion citizens will go under total lockdown for 21 days to combat the spread of the pandemic.
Please listen carefully. From 12 midnight today, the entire country will go under a complete lockdown. To save India, every Indian, and to save you and your family, from midnight tonight, there will be a total ban on venturing out of your homes.
After confirming its first case of COVID-19, Syria has taken preventive measures to stop the spread of the disease. More details in this report.
A young Syrian woman who had just arrived from abroad was the first case to test positive for COVID-19. Strict medical controls implemented in the borders allowed for the quick detection. But Damascus says that the US and European blockade will hurt preventive measures against the novel coronavirus.
Recently, we marked 9 years of war, a war that affects all sectors of life, including health, which greatly suffers the consequences of the blockade. We denounce how it limits our capacity to face this pandemic because it exacerbates our lack of resources. It makes our jobs harder and worsens the situation.
Immediately after confirming the case, Syrian authorities announced the closure of Syria's borders with Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Public transportation was also suspended in cities and provinces, and the production of all printed media was halted until further notice.
We support the measures adopted, especially in markets and border areas, and the suspension of public transportation. Let's hope that this strategy helps contain the spread of the virus.
A general amnesty declared by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is part of one of the many preventive measures that also include the closure of markets and shopping centers. Work was also suspended in public institutions in order to avoid mass gatherings, as well as all services in churches and mosques.
Within the framework of establishing preventive measures to protect citizens in this pandemic, we think that the measures are appropriate. We hope citizens comply fully in order to safeguard our country.
While sterilization and disinfection campaigns continue in all provinces of the country, citizens have adhered to recommendations and started to self-isolate.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has imposed new restrictions to try and curb further spread of the coronavirus. British citizens have been instructed to strictly stay at home and only allowed to go out in small numbers for necessary purposes. He has also ordered all non-essential shops to close. Johnson warned that the measures put in place are going to be enforced by the police. British citizens had continued living their normal lives and have been going about business as usual since the outbreak of COVID-19. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, caught up with Labour Party activist Umar Kasmi for his thoughts on the measures taken by the Prime Minister.
It's welcome that Boris Johnson has finally decided to take serious action to combat this crisis by instructing people to stay at home. But the measures clearly don't go far enough, and there still isn't a full lockdown of the country. Many people are still leaving their homes, particularly self-employed people who currently don't have the option to stay at home because the government hasn't given them the financial support that they require. We also know that many big companies like Sports Direct have tried to resist complying with the new rules, but it seems that most businesses are beginning to close down. Currently, the UK has followed a similar trajectory to Italy in terms of the numbers of people infected and the numbers of people who've sadly died. Despite that, we're still not taking as many measures as Italy has done. So unfortunately, I think we're likely to see this getting much worse over the coming weeks before it gets better. And many people are going to die needlessly because of the inaction by this government.
And we end in Cuba, where prominent filmmaker Juan Padrón passed away in Havana today at the age of 73. In his prolific career as a cartoonist, illustrator, and screenwriter, Padrón stood out as one of the most successful producers of cartoon in Cuba, where he gave life to unforgettable characters that mark the memory of generations. At the time of his death, he was an advisor to the animation studies at the Cuban Institute of Cinematographic Art and Industry. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.